The fog over Puget Sound was thick as wet cotton that morning, curling around the hull of the military transport ship as it crept toward the docks like a ghost from across the Pacific. A sharp metallic groan rang out as chains shifted, and the vessel began to slow. From a narrow porthole deep below deck, Yuriko Sato pressed her palm against the glass, leaving a faint print in the condensation. Through the mist, she could just make out the outlines of cranes and cargo ships the American mainland, enemy land. Her heart was pounding, not from fear of death, but from something far worse, humiliation. She had been trained to expect cruelty, to prepare for degradation, to die before disgrace. Her instructors had warned, if you are captured, they will strip you of your honor, your uniform, your humanity. She believed them. Every woman in that dim, swaying hold believed them too. Be prepared for anything. And yet, the silence outside was unsettling. No shouting, no boot stomping, just a faint whistle in the wind and the low murmur of English through steel walls. Was this how demons announced themselves? Yuriko turned to the girl beside her, barely 20, still clinging to a tattered officer's manual, and whispered, "Do you think they'll hurt us right away, or will they wait until we're alone?" Before anyone could answer, footsteps approached. A key scraped in the lock. Everybody tensed. What she saw next was not what she expected. Before we find out what awaited Yuriko and her fellow captives on that foreign shore, tell us, where are you watching from today? We'd love to know who's joining us as we uncover this forgotten story of fear, dignity, and the quiet unraveling of everything they thought they knew. The door opened with a slow, metallic groan that seemed to drag the breath from every woman in the room. Yuriko stood frozen, heart beating like a war drum in her chest, waiting for the violence, the shouting, the spit in the face, whatever punishment the victors of war deemed fitting for the defeated. Instead, a tall man in a crisp uniform stepped into view. He held no weapon at the ready. His hands were empty. His posture was upright but not aggressive, and what struck her most was his eyes clear, alert, and calm. "Good morning," he said, in careful, accented Japanese. "My name is Lieutenant David Harris. You are now under the custody of the United States Army. Please gather your belongings. Transportation to the holding facility is ready." The words landed softly, like snow on pavement. For a long moment, no one moved. The silence was eerie. Was this a trick? A setup? Yuriko glanced toward the younger women, their eyes wide, mouths slightly open, waiting for the whip crack that never came. They stepped out of the hold in single file, blinking into a pale gray morning light. Cold air hit her cheeks like a forgotten memory. The sky above Seattle was veiled in clouds, but the land, this land she had been told was a den of beasts, was quiet. Dock workers moved in orderly patterns, cranes hummed in the distance, and military vehicles stood parked in perfect rows. Everything was organized, clean, functional. No one jeered at them. No one touched them. A young American woman in uniform, her blonde hair tucked neatly beneath her cap, approached holding a clipboard. "Prisoner intake? Group 14? She asked. Lieutenant Harris nodded. Yuriko's breath caught in her throat. A woman? Giving orders? In Japan, such a thing was unthinkable. Women could serve, yes, but always beneath, behind, and beneath again. Never giving orders, never commanding attention or space. Yet here stood this woman, firm but not harsh, treated with complete deference by the male soldiers around her. They were led to buses, not cages, not trucks with chains, but standard military buses with clean interiors and functioning heaters. Yuriko slid into a seat beside the window and gripped the edge tightly, unsure whether to be grateful or afraid. The ride through the city only deepened the confusion. Seattle, unlike Tokyo or Osaka, showed no signs of ruin. No bomb craters, no skeletal buildings, no children dragging buckets of water from bombed-out wells. The streets were busy. The people, men and women, both walked without fear. Shops were open. Windows full of bread, fruit, radios, coats. Cars passed in every direction. Well-fed children clutched schoolbooks, and women wore lipstick and laughter on their lips. Yuriko watched a man in a naval uniform lean down and kiss his wife gently before she handed him a lunch wrapped in a red scarf. Was this war? Was this the country that had been described to them as brutal, godless, mechanical? The girls behind her whispered, nervously at first, then with wonder. "They don't look like monsters," one said. "Look at that bakery. There are cakes. Whole cakes in the window." "It's propaganda," muttered another. "They're showing us the good part to make us doubt our country." But Yuriko wasn't so sure. This didn't feel staged. This felt normal. As the bus turned off the main road and passed through the gates of a military installation, Camp Clearwater, the unease in her chest grew heavier. Surely now, the mask would drop. This would be the real America. The brutality waiting behind polite smiles. But once again, reality betrayed her expectations. The facility was spotless, the buildings freshly painted, grass trimmed. A group of American nurses crossed the quad, laughing over coffee, while a soldier held the door for them. Yuriko watched it all with quiet tension, afraid to let her guard down, afraid of what it would mean if this wasn't an illusion. They were directed to a debriefing room where blankets, hygiene kits, and fresh uniforms were issued. A Japanese-American translator explained each item. "You will be assigned temporary quarters," he said gently. "Your rights under the Geneva Convention will be respected. Medical care is available. If you are in need of assistance, please raise your hand." This way doing the rangs. No one raised a hand. They sat in silence, stunned. Yuriko clutched the wool blanket in her lap. It smelled faintly of soap and cedar. Her fingers curled around the fabric, half expecting it to vanish. That night, in the quiet of the assigned barracks, Yuriko lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Around her, the others whispered in the dark, asking the same questions that buzzed inside her skull. Why haven't they beaten us? Why are they being kind? What are they waiting for? She turned toward the girl on the next bunk and asked, almost afraid to hear the answer, "Do you think we've been lied to?" The girl didn't answer right away. Then softly she said, "I don't know. But this isn't what I was told." Neither of them slept much. Kindness could be a weapon. Comfort could be a trap. Or it could be real. Yuriko didn't know which was more frightening. What if the world outside the Empire was not savage, but sane? What if the enemy was not barbaric, but simply different? That was the thought that finally unsettled her most. Not the fear of pain, but the fear that everything she believed might be wrong. And if that was true, what did it mean about herself? Let us know in the comments. Have you ever questioned everything you thought was true? Share your thoughts. And stay with us, because what happens next will change everything Yuriko thought she knew about the world, her country, and herself. The morning came with soft footsteps and the muted rattle of keys. Yuriko stirred from her bunk, the wool blanket still tucked beneath her chin. The scent of clean linen, oddly comforting. Outside the window, the sky was pale blue, streaked with the thinnest veil of clouds. For a moment, she forgot where she was until the uniformed woman entered. "Good morning, ladies," said the voice in practiced Japanese. "I'm Captain Eleanor Price. I'll be your orientation officer." Yuriko blinked. Captain. A woman. Again. And this one wore the rank on her shoulder with ease, her stance unflinching, her tone neither harsh nor sweet, just professional. Around her, the other prisoners straightened instinctively. Years of training made them reflexively respectful toward authority. But something else filled the air now, discomfort. Not with the rules, but with who enforced them. They followed Captain Price to a briefing hall, where rows of chairs had been arranged like a classroom. Coffee steamed on a side table. Fresh paper and pencils sat waiting. Yuriko hesitated at the threshold, unsure whether to feel honored or manipulated. Were they expected to relax here? To forget they were prisoners? A projector flickered on. An American nurse explained camp policies in simple Japanese. Medical care would be provided. Meals would be regular, balanced, and monitored by nutritionists. Prisoners would be given the right to send and receive letters through Red Cross channels. Complaints could be submitted anonymously. Religious services, any religion, would be accommodated. The room remained silent, as each privilege was listed. Yuriko felt her stomach tighten, not because she was angry, but because none of this aligned with the world she had come from. Back in the Empire, obedience was demanded, not earned. Food was scarce even for soldiers. Nurses served under brutal conditions, and no one asked what they believed. But here, in a facility surrounded by barbed wire, they were being offered things their own country never gave them freely. After orientation, a quiet translator named Daniel, a Japanese-American sergeant, escorted Yuriko to the infirmary for a routine checkup. He spoke with the slight formality of someone caught between cultures. "Miss Sato," he said, avoiding the military title she no longer officially held. "We'll check your vitals, run a basic scan, and provide you with supplies. Please let me know if anything is uncomfortable." The medical room was spotless. The American doctor, an older man named Dr. Wallace, smiled kindly, but spoke with brisk efficiency. "Blood pressure's a bit high. Understandable. Stress. You'll settle in. Word dade in that revenende." Yuriko flinched slightly at the contact when he checked her pulse. It wasn't the touch that unsettled her. It was the lack of cruelty in it. No slaps, no grabbing, no suspicion. "You worked in technical design?" he asked, while reviewing her intake form. She nodded. "We might need some help in maintenance, if you're willing. No pressure." Her breath caught at that last phrase, "no pressure." Since when did prisoners get asked, not ordered? Later that week, Captain Price returned to their barracks to introduce optional programs. "We offer language courses, vocational training, and lectures on American history and international law," she said. "Attendance is voluntary. You won't be penalized for refusing." Voluntary. That word again. It hovered in Yuriko's mind, like a feather caught in wind. She had never heard it in a military context before, not in Japanese, and not in war. Yuriko chose to attend. Maybe out of curiosity, maybe because she didn't know what else to do. The classroom was held in a converted barrack with rows of books stacked along the back wall. A retired American teacher named Helen Davis greeted them with warm eyes behind thick glasses. "Today," she began, "we'll discuss the structure of democratic government, how people choose their leaders, how laws are created by representatives, not decreed by rulers." It felt like fiction. One woman raised her hand hesitantly. "What if the people make the wrong choice?" "Then they try again," Helen replied. "Democracy isn't perfect, but it allows correction. It admits failure." Yuriko didn't know whether to be impressed or unsettled. Failure, in Japan, was final, shameful, disqualifying. Here, it seemed to be part of the process. Back in the barracks that night, the discussions continued in whispers. "They want to convert us," one woman said. "Maybe," another replied. "But what if it's not conversion? What if it's just education?" Yuriko didn't answer. Her mind was too full. In the following days, she found herself studying alongside women who had once flinched at the sound of English. They now struggled through basic sentences, asked questions, underlined new words, and the Americans treated them not as spies or enemies, but as students. Sergeant Daniel loaned her a book on mechanical theory. "I heard you were a systems engineer. This might interest you." She took it with both hands, bowing slightly, the old habits of formality not yet shed. He smiled, but didn't mock her for it. At night, she read by the dim light above her bunk. Diagrams of generators, sketches of current flow, notes about efficiency. The language was foreign, but the logic was universal. For the first time since being captured, she felt a flicker of herself returning. And that frightened her more than anything. Because if the enemy could give her back her sense of identity, her intelligence, her purpose, then what had her own side taken from her? By the second week, she volunteered to assist in the camp workshop repairing radios. American technicians showed her the schematics without hesitation, trusted her hands, let her lead. It wasn't a test. It was trust. That night, as the women settled in for bed, Yuriko sat silently holding a soldering iron she had used all afternoon. It was small, unremarkable, but it had passed through her fingers without fear, without supervision, without permission. She whispered to no one in particular, "This place doesn't feel like a prison." The girl across from her replied, "Maybe it's not." Yuriko didn't sleep, not from worry, but from the slow, quiet tremor of doubt that crept beneath her skin. If this is what imprisonment felt like, then what had she been living in before? She looked out the window. Beyond the barbed wire, the lights of the American camp glowed steady and calm in the distance. She began to wonder, could freedom come from the unlikeliest place of all? The next turning point came not with grand announcements or flashing signs, but with a clipboard and a question. Yuriko had just finished repairing a shortwave receiver in the workshop when Captain Price appeared beside her, arms crossed, expression unreadable. For a moment, Yuriko braced herself. Had she done something wrong, taken too much initiative, stepped outside her place? Instead, Price spoke with her usual calm authority. "Miss Sato, the camp medical director, reviewed your records. You were trained as a surgical assistant?" Yuriko nodded slowly, caught off guard. "Dr. Monroe would like to meet with you. He's short-staffed. We have wounded prisoners Japanese who need post-operative care. Would you be willing to assist under supervision?" Would she be willing? The question hung there, heavy with layers she didn't know how to unwrap. No one had asked her if she was willing in years, not in Japan, not in the Navy, not in life. "Yes," she said after a breath. "I would." Later that day, she stood outside the infirmary again, this time not as a patient, not as a passive observer, but as a medical professional. Her hands trembled as she pulled on the coat they gave her. It wasn't a uniform, but it was clean. Her name was written on the breast pocket in careful letters. Y. Sato. Dr. Monroe, a graying man with a clipped Boston accent and tired eyes, welcomed her with a firm handshake and a matter-of-fact tone. "We're not here to play politics, Miss Sato. You have training. People are in pain. Let's do our jobs." And so she did. She cleaned wounds. She helped change dressings. She translated for patients who refused to speak English. She held hands when the morphine wasn't enough. And through it all, she was treated as an equal, not an outsider, not a prisoner, a colleague. It was disorienting. One afternoon, while assisting in a minor procedure, an American nurse turned to her and said, "You're good. Where'd you study?" "Kyoto Women's Medical College," Yuriko replied. The nurse raised an eyebrow. "Impressive. Wish more of our male med students had your steady hands." The comment startled her. It wasn't just praise. It was recognition, validation, something she had been starved of for years. Word spread quickly. Soon, other women from the barracks were being asked to help in different departments. One became a clerk for the camp's inventory system. Another translated technical manuals for incoming shipments. Two began formal training in accounting. Their value wasn't in their surrender. It was in their skill. At night, they gathered and whispered, with a different kind of energy, no longer just confusion or fear, but something softer, brighter. "They listen to me," one woman said, eyes wide. "They actually ask what I think." "They're training me in radio calibration," said another. "They say I have a talent for frequency stabilization." Yuriko listened, smiled quietly, but said little. Inside, her own feelings were messy. She didn't know how to make sense of the warmth blooming in her chest. It felt traitorous. Was it wrong to feel alive in captivity? One evening, as the sun dipped low and golden across the barbed wire perimeter, she walked alone to the far end of the camp. There, beneath a crooked pine tree, she stood still and let the wind tangle her hair. Beyond the fence, she saw a young American soldier handing his canteen to a barefoot Japanese prisoner in the garden. There was no shouting, no shoving, just two people under the same sky. Yuriko didn't cry, though something deep inside her wanted to. Not from sadness, not even from joy, but from the ache of seeing the world not as black and white, but full of quiet, complicated grays. Later that week, Dr. Monroe approached her after a long shift. "I've been reviewing some of our staff recommendations," he said. "I'd like to submit your name for advanced clinical observation. It's informal, but you'd be shadowing surgical cases. Think of it as continuing education." Loris's beer. her mouth opened slightly. "You would allow me?" He chuckled. "Miss Sato, you're not being allowed. You've earned it." That night, she stared at the ceiling in her bunk, the words echoing like a song she didn't know she'd been longing to hear. You've earned it. In Japan, she had passed every test, followed every rule, swallowed every dismissal with discipline. Here, in the middle of a foreign war, she was being given what her own country had never offered, the chance to grow. During one of the classes, she found herself beside Sergeant Daniel again. He handed her a folder materials on surgical protocols. "You're one of the smartest people I've met here," he said quietly. "I hope you know that." Yuriko couldn't speak. She just nodded, overwhelmed. The realization crept in slowly, then suddenly. This place wasn't making her forget who she was. It was allowing her to remember. But that gift came with a question she had tried to avoid. If the war ended, what would she do? Go back to Japan? To a society that would see her accomplishments as inconvenient, her voice as disobedience? Or stay? The word frightened her. Stay. It felt enormous, disloyal, dangerous. And yet, it also felt honest. She looked at her hands. Not tied, not trembling. Steady, working, healing. The thought slipped into her mind like a whisper. What if the life I want isn't behind me, but ahead? And with it, the seed of choice began to bloom. The announcement came on a rain-soaked Tuesday afternoon, pinned to the bulletin board outside the dining hall where prisoners gathered for their evening meal. The typewritten notice was brief, bureaucratic, and yet it shattered every illusion of simplicity Yuriko had clung to. Effective immediately, the U.S. War Department would allow prisoners of war with specialized skills and clean disciplinary records to apply for conditional residency with the possibility of permanent immigration after the war's end. Each case would be reviewed individually, no guarantees, but the door, for the first time, was open. Yuriko stood staring at the notice, long after others had moved away. The raindrops blurred the words, but they were already etched into her mind. She felt a quiet ache open in her chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't fear. It was something in between. A cracking, a widening, a possibility. That evening, the barracks hummed with whispers. Some women wept. Others argued. A few laughed nervously, as if the entire idea were absurd. "I would never betray my country," hissed one, "no matter how kind the enemy appears." "What country are we betraying?" Another whispered back. "The one that left us behind? That never let us speak?" Yuriko sat quietly, fingers twisting the edge of her blanket, heart pounding with the weight of a question that refused to leave her. If I stayed, would I be betraying Japan? Or would I finally be choosing myself? Later that night, Sergeant Daniel found her in the workshop, pretending to reorganize tools she'd already sorted twice. "You read the notice," he said gently. She nodded, eyes fixed on a soldering tip. "You're eligible. Everyone knows that." She hesitated. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then, what would you be going back to? That was the question, wasn't it? What awaited her in post-war Japan? A ruined city, an angry public, a system that saw her intellect as a threat, her choices as disobedience? Would her medical skills matter if she had no husband, no status, no silence to offer? "I don't know," she whispered. He didn't push. He just nodded and left her with the quiet of her thoughts. Days passed in slow motion. The application sat on the corner of her bunk like a silent mirror, asking her to look at herself with clarity she wasn't sure she was ready for. Some of the women applied without hesitation. Others tore the forms up in defiance, choosing repatriation as an act of patriotic purity. Yuriko understood both responses. They were both born of fear, just different kinds. One feared the pain of letting go. The other feared the pain of being erased again. One night, Ko, a former communications officer who had been among the most fervently nationalist of the group, approached Yuriko by the laundry line. "You're going to apply, aren't you?" Yuriko didn't answer. Ko exhaled slowly. 6 months ago, I would have called that betrayal. But now, she paused. Now I think maybe staying is the only way some of us get to live. That broke something loose. inside Yuriko. Not in anger, in recognition. Because Ko, too, had felt it, the subtle resurrection of self. The unbearable realization that perhaps the empire they fought for never truly saw them. The next morning, Yuriko walked into the administrative office and placed the form on the desk of the immigration liaison. Her signature, clear and steady. She didn't tremble. She didn't look back. That afternoon, she stood outside the infirmary, hands in her pockets, staring up at the cloud-choked sky. The wind carried the scent of wet pine and distant ocean. A seagull drifted overhead, its wings cutting the gray like paper. She remembered her father's voice when she left home to join the Navy. Don't embarrass the family. Don't speak too much. Don't think too much. Be useful. But standing there, with the smell of iodine still clinging to her sleeves, she thought, I have done more than be useful. I have healed. I have led. I have lived. When the confirmation came a week later that her application had moved to the next stage, she didn't cry. She simply nodded. A quiet, internal yes. That evening, she shared the news with a few of the other applicants. Yuki, her soft-spoken bunkmate, hugged her tightly. I'm proud of you, she said. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, Yuriko confessed. Yuki smiled sadly. Maybe there isn't a right thing. Maybe there's just what gives you a future. 2R for Pleaded. And that was it, wasn't it? Loyalty to a nation that silenced her, or loyalty to the part of herself that had come alive here? In the days that followed, Yuriko helped others complete their applications. Women who once trembled at English words, now confidently practicing how to say, I would like to stay, with quiet dignity. But even in those small acts of courage, the fear lingered. What would people back home say? What would family think? What history would record? And yet, the silence of being invisible, obedient, and voiceless, that was a prison far crueler than barbed wire. On her final night before the interview, Yuriko sat alone beneath the crooked pine, the same place she had once watched a soldier hand water to a prisoner. The wind tugged gently at her sleeves. Somewhere, behind her, someone laughed. The sound floated, light and free. She closed her eyes and whispered the truth, perhaps for the first time. I don't want to go back to being silent. And just like that, the choice was made. Not to forget Japan, but to reclaim herself in a place that had unexpectedly taught her how. The day Yuriko received her notice of approval, the sky over Camp Clearwater was the clearest it had been in weeks. A stillness hung in the air, not the kind born of tension, but of change, of something ending, something beginning. She held the letter in her hands for a long time, rereading the line that mattered most. Your application for permanent residency has been approved. The words were simple. The meaning was not. It wasn't just a decision on paper. It was the culmination of every silent doubt, every quiet moment of courage, every time she had dared to believe that who she was might matter more than where she came from. She had not betrayed Japan. She had chosen herself. And now America had chosen her too. The formalities moved quickly after that. Immigration interviews, medical clearances, a final panel before the Naturalization Board. Yuriko walked through each step with calm resolution, answering questions in steady English, the same language she once feared would mark her as other. Now it was a bridge, a tool, a new part of her voice. She wasn't alone. 23 other women from the original group had also applied. Of those, 20 had been approved. They gathered weekly in the camp's old classroom, helping each other rehearse the Pledge of Allegiance, navigating vocabulary, supporting those who still questioned if this was right. Was it betrayal? Was it abandonment? Yuriko had stopped asking those questions. Now she asked different ones. What kind of country gives women the right to choose their path? What kind of life is possible when no one tells you what you're allowed to dream? When the day of the citizenship ceremony came, they were escorted to a courthouse in San Francisco. It was strange to be outside the camp walls without guards flanking them. No one barked orders. No one told them not to speak. Instead, they were handed small American flags, simple paper programs, and asked to stand beside immigrants from Poland, Mexico, China, Germany, and Haiti. The judge was an older black man with a voice like velvet and a posture shaped by struggle and survival. "You do not become American by erasing who you were," he said. "You become American by choosing what you want to be, freely, fully, without fear." Yuriko felt tears press behind her eyes. She did not let them fall. But when she placed her hand over her heart and said the words, "I pledge allegiance," she did so not as a prisoner, not as a refugee, but as a woman who had been broken and rebuilt on her own terms. After the ceremony, they gathered on the courthouse steps for a photograph. Someone brought a cake, someone else brought sake. The blend was awkward and perfect. That night they held a small celebration back in the barracks. Though they were no longer prisoners, they were residents now, on the path to full citizenship, on the path to becoming something new. Yuki, now training as a communications technician for a civilian radio company, stood beside her. "Do you remember," she whispered, "when we thought we'd die in that transport ship?" "I remember thinking we might live worse than death," Yuriko said softly. "And now?" Yuriko looked around the room. Women who once trembled at the sound of English were now laughing in it. Women who once bowed in silence now shared opinions. Ko was now studying business management. Hana was applying to work as a nurse's aide. The girl who used to cry herself to sleep was now teaching Japanese cooking to American families. "Now," she answered, "we've learned how to live." Still, the past lingered. She thought often of those who chose to return to Japan. Some had done so out of duty, others out of fear. She did not judge them, but she couldn't help wondering what they found when they stepped back onto that soil. Would they be welcomed? Silenced? Forgotten? Weeks later, Yuriko received a job offer from a private hospital in San Francisco, an internship in surgical assistance with the possibility of further medical education. Dr. Monroe had written a recommendation letter. It read, in part, "Miss Sato possesses not only technical skill, but the rare quality of empathy under fire. She has earned the right to grow. In Wiven and the Wayfrus." She packed her things slowly, folded her uniforms, took down the drawings she had pinned above her bunk. Before leaving, she visited the crooked pine tree one last time, placing her hand on its weathered bark as if to thank it for witnessing her rebirth. San Francisco felt overwhelming at first. The noise, the pace, the wide roads, the unfamiliar rhythms of freedom. But she adapted. The city had room for reinvention. She found a small apartment near the hospital. She ate toast with butter for breakfast, something unthinkable back in wartime Japan. She rode streetcars, learned to tip waitresses, and sent polite thank you notes in a language she once resisted. Every month, she and the other former prisoners met at a rented community hall, a tradition they called the Second Life Circle. They shared updates, helped each other with paperwork, wrote to family, and whispered secrets about dreams they hadn't dared say out loud in their first lives. They were no longer just survivors. They were guides. One day, Captain now Major Eleanor Price visited their gathering with an official from the Department of War. She carried a new kind of notice, one that wasn't printed for the public. "Ladies," she said, "you've become a model case. The War Department is establishing a new integration program. We'd like your help in welcoming incoming Japanese immigrants, especially women, teaching language, explaining customs, helping them see that they are not alone." Yuriko felt something rise in her throat, a mixture of disbelief and quiet joy. Help other women become free, not by erasing their roots, but by showing them how to grow through them. She accepted immediately. In the months that followed, she worked at the hospital during the day, and in the evenings she volunteered leading small discussion groups, teaching English, answering questions like, "Will I ever be accepted here?" She always answered the same way. "You will be respected when you learn to respect yourself. And here, you're allowed to do that." One night, a young woman who had just arrived from Hiroshima pulled her aside. "How did you survive?" she asked. "Not just the war. This whole change." Yuriko smiled gently. "I stopped trying to survive. I started trying to live." She thought about everything she'd lost, her homeland, her title, her certainty. But she also thought of everything she had gained. A voice, a future, a self. She was no longer just Yuriko Sato, prisoner of war. She was Yuriko Sato, surgical assistant, mentor, citizen, woman. She no longer feared being seen. And more importantly, she no longer feared seeing herself. Because freedom, she had learned, was not the absence of bars or commands. It was the presence of choice, voice, worth. And in the end, that was the kind of freedom no nation could give or take away. It was the kind she had found in the quiet act of believing that she mattered. Yuriko's story did not end with a flag or a certificate. It did not end with applause or headlines. It continued quietly, in the corridors of a hospital, in the careful movement of her hands as she stitched a wound, in the patient smile she offered to new immigrants frightened by a world they didn't yet understand. Her life had become a bridge between cultures, between wars, between the girl she had once been and the woman she chose to become. Sometimes, she would sit by her apartment window at dusk, watching the fog roll in from the bay, and wonder what her mother would think if she saw her now, a woman living alone, earning her own money, healing strangers, speaking a language she once feared. A woman who was no one's servant, no one's property, not even her country's. But she no longer felt shame in the wondering. She felt peace. Freedom, Yuriko had learned, was not loud. It was not always draped in banners or paraded through streets. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it waited. Sometimes it arrived in the most unexpected places, like a prison camp with clean beds and kind strangers, or a letter granting her the right to stay, to work, to belong. And above all, she learned that freedom is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to walk forward anyway. The war had taken many things from her: certainty, security, illusions. But it had also given her a rare chance to begin again, to redefine what loyalty meant, to understand that honoring your country does not require abandoning your dignity, and that choosing your future is not betrayal, it is liberation. So as we remember Yuriko's journey, and the quiet strength of the women who walked beside her, let us ask ourselves the same question they once faced in silence. What does freedom mean when no one is watching? And would we have the courage to choose it? Let us know where you're watching from, because somewhere out there, someone may still be waiting just like Yuriko once did for the moment they realize they are allowed to be more. Not less, not invisible, but more. And that might just change everything.